Welcome back to the channel, guys. I've done so many ND2 and ND3 versus Gen 2 BRZ and GR86 comparisons, but this one's going to be a bit different because they're both heavily modified. In stock form, both of these cars have been criticized, often by people who don't get the point of these cars, for being underpowered. The Gen 2 BRZ makes 228 horsepower, the ND2 Miata makes 181 horsepower. But they are super light, nimble, and fun to drive, with front-engine rear-wheel drive dynamics, a limited slip differential, 6-speed manual, and high-revving little 4-cylinder engines. But what happens when you add a boatload of power? This 2023 BRZ has a Harrop Supercharger and an E85 tune that pushes the power up to just over 300 at the wheels, whereas that 2021 ND2 Miata we're about to drive next has a turbocharger pushing the power output to roughly 220 at the wheels. So the BRZ is quite a bit more powerful, but it also weighs about 500 pounds more at roughly 2,800 pounds versus the ND2's 2,300. The rest of the mods on these two cars are quite extensive. I'll put the full list in the video description, but this BRZ has HKS Hipermax S coilovers, upgraded pads and fluid, and these beautiful BBS RIA wheels. They're 18x10 plus 41 all around, and we're running some Falcon RT660 tires. Also quite a few exterior and interior mods, including these amazing Recaro pole position seats. So let's start with the Supercharged BRZ, the car that I should be the most familiar with since I owned a Gen 2 BRZ, and then try that turbocharged ND2 Miata and assess if these cars are actually more fun to drive with forced induction. This BRZ has a super aggressive aftermarket clutch, and I embarrassingly stalled it in front of the owner earlier. Ooh, just barely. The engine got real quiet there when the revs dropped. Now, Falcon RT660 tires on a very damp surface today, they have absolutely no grip at all, so we're gonna take it easy. That's quite a bit more power than stock. It still pulls really nicely to the red line, which is around 7,400 RPM. But first driving impressions, it feels very comfortable. It feels like just a lightly modified BRZ. The engine still has that characteristic Boxer 4 rumble. This HKS Hipermax S suspension is tuned mostly for the streets, so it maintains good compliance and ride quality. This car has electric power steering, just like the first gen FRS and BRZ. And it's fine. It's decent for an EPS, but it's certainly no Porsche GT3 in terms of steering feel. The 6-speed manual is a joy to use, but it's not as crisp as I would like. I have a feeling when I hop into that ND2 Miata, I'm gonna far prefer the shifter in that car. While we're waiting for the road to open up a bit, let's talk about the philosophy behind the BRZ in stock form. It's a car that in Gen 1 form, with its measly 200 horsepower, was criticized a lot for not having enough power to match the amazing chassis. It had such good handling, with a Torsen LSD as standard and a 6-speed manual, low center of gravity. It was every driving enthusiast's, on paper, perfect budget sports car, except for that engine. It was a buzzy and kind of rough 2-liter boxer that didn't make the greatest sound. It did rev out to over 7,000 RPM, but it just left you wanting more. For the first couple of years, everyone on the forums was just saying, if only this had another 50 to 100 horsepower. And the car continued in that state for several years before it was finally discontinued after the 2020 model year. The first model year was 2013. Then there was a 1-year hiatus, and then the second gen BRZ was released, and GR86. And on paper, it only made about 15% more power at 228. But in reality, based on dyno results, it made something like 40 to 50 more horsepower. And if you ask me, in terms of my ownership experience, daily driving and tracking a Gen 2 BRZ, it had just enough power to not feel held back, but it still could have used a little bit more. So now that this car, oh yeah, there's good mid-range torque. After all, it's a supercharger. It maintains a lot of the throttle response that we love from the naturally aspirated engine. It builds power progressively to its red line still, which I'm gonna try to find an open stretch of road here to demonstrate that. See, it's still a very manageable amount of power. You might even think, if you're used to lower horsepower cars, that over 300 at the wheels would make this car feel scary, but that's actually not the case. Because it's a supercharger, it maintains 80 to 90% of the response of a naturally aspirated motor. Let me demonstrate that. Very traction limited in first gear because of these Falcon RT660 tires not being suited to this damp road. But as you can see, once we got it into second gear, it hooked up and it just goes. It pulls and it pulls all the way to the top. And it doesn't ruin the balance of this car. Oftentimes when you add 30, 40, 50% or even more horsepower, there can be certain aspects of it that then become glaring weaknesses. Like the brakes, the suspension. But what Philip has done here with the HKS coilovers, just some upgraded pads and fluid with stock calipers, and all the supporting mods, it still feels like a cohesive package. It feels like a car that you could actually buy from the factory as a sort of STI BRZ. And that power is just so satisfying now. But the slight drawbacks or flaws of the BRZ are still there. The steering a little bit numb, just a little. I'd say it's a 7 or 7.5 out of 10 in steering feel for me. Not as good as the Gen 1 FRS and BRZ in that regard. Also for track work, I think you'd probably want to upgrade the brakes, at least the front brakes, to the performance package Brembos. But that's about it, to be honest. The rest of this car is just still so fun. It's so well balanced. On track, it's super neutral. You can throttle steer it all day long. We're not able to push it very hard today because of the road conditions. But nevertheless, I can just feel the inherent balance of this car, and the extra power doesn't ruin it. Whoa. No grip at all. The surface looks pretty dry, but in fact, it's super greasy. If there is one complaint I still have with this engine, even with this honestly ideal power output and power delivery, the sound. It still has that kind of agricultural boxer force sound. It's a bit rough. Even at high RPM, you get the fake engine sound piped in from the speakers. It doesn't sound natural. I'll be curious to see if the turbocharger on that Miata inline 4 hampers the sound of that car, because this just basically sounds stock, to be honest. It doesn't even sound like it has a supercharger. Oh, traction limited. But at least in stock form, I always preferred the sound and response of the Miata's little 4-cylinder, at least for the ND2. The ND1 engine was very disappointing. No traction. I mean, I guess that is the limiting factor, right? When you have this much extra power, you are going to be traction limited in these types of conditions. I feel like on a track though, a dry track, this car would be an absolute riot and a weapon, because this car can keep up with much more expensive sports cars in the corners. It was always held back mainly by its engine. Bit of a buzzkill due to the road conditions, but we still got to enjoy the straight line performance, just get a taste of what a supercharger does to the BRZ. Let's now hop into the turbocharged ND2 and see which one is more fun. All right, we're now in the 2021 Mazda ND2 Miata with a turbocharger. Mods will be in the video description, but the owner, Kale, has turned this into a toge and a track car. So we've got an ISR race exhaust, which is catless. It's extremely loud and drony. A JDL turbo kit, stage 2 clutch, Koni adjustable dampers, sway bars, wheels and tires, etc. Kale mentioned that he estimates this should be putting down around 220 horsepower at the wheels. That's something like 60 to 65 wheel horsepower more than stock. Originally, this car made 181 horsepower and 151 pound-feet of torque. But like I was mentioning earlier, the stock car is so fun in part because of its amazing throttle response. The fact that you can rev it out, you can heel toe rev match super easily, low learning curve. Every time you touch that throttle pedal, you know exactly what the engine's gonna do. Will the turbocharger compromise that? This car only weighs around 2,300 pounds. We've got the optional Recaro seats and Brembo brakes. He swapped out the BBS wheels for these Koenig decograms. They're 17x9 all around, and he's rocking 245 section width Bridgestone RE71 RS tires. He's got a lot of track mods as well. Koyo Rad, a larger radiator, singular hood vents, Mishimoto oil cooler, and this massive 9 lives rear wing. Let's see how all that translates into driving dynamics. Interior is pretty much stock, with the exception of this hilariously massive shift knob. Nice seating position, although with these Recaros, I still want to be sitting a couple of inches lower. I feel like I'm kind of sitting on top of the car rather than inside of it. It's also much more cramped interior compared to the BRZ. We've got a boost gauge here, temperatures. Let's see how this drives with a turbo. I've been so curious of how the ND2 would feel with a turbocharger. Personally, I was always of the thought that a supercharger was what this car needed, but let's see how this changes the character. This exhaust is no joke. It sounds catless and with no mufflers. Just straight piped. Hopefully you can still hear me. I can barely hear myself think. The throttle response is a little bit funky. At low RPM, it's not as responsive. For example, let's get down to around 2,700 RPM, 4th gear. See, I under-blipped it there. The throttle response does feel a bit dull. Heavier blip is what you need for those lower RPM downshifts. But even driving at 4/10, the inherent lightness and nimbleness of the Miata is still very apparent, even compared to that lightweight BRZ. But an extra 500 pounds, you feel that in the corners, you feel that at all speeds. Even just putting around at 2,000 RPM, 3rd gear, this car feels so light on its feet. And that's amplified by the light controls. Steering is very light, actually lighter than I would like personally. I prefer the later ND3's updated steering rack. The shifter is also very low effort, but it's got a much slicker engagement compared to the BRZ's transmission, which is a little bit notchy and higher resistance into each gate. This is just buttery smooth. Look, I can shift it with 2 fingers. So on this very low speed road, you don't feel the benefit of the turbo because you're not really able to wind it out. Actually, all you get are drawbacks because now there's lag. You don't get that direct throttle response that you do when it's stock. It's harder to rev match the downshifts now, but that's why you, at high RPM, man, this engine really comes to life. It just explodes with power above about 4,000. Wow, mid-corner there, if you can even call that slight bend a corner, the engine came on boost, and it was about to send the car sideways. It never actually lost traction, but it was about to. I could feel it through this Recaro seat, which, by the way, does have pretty good bolstering. This car is no longer a whimsical little toy that you can throw it around with reckless abandon. Now you actually have to be careful. Power output is no joke. It actually feels pretty quick in a straight line, and its power delivery is a lot more violent than that of the supercharged BRZ. That lag really can catch you off guard if you're not ready for it. And then when you lift off the throttle, all of a sudden the car almost kind of bucks you a little bit. just as bad as the Falcon RT660s in the wet. Actually, I feel like I have a little bit more grip with these, but still, it's an aggressive 200 tread wear, and it's not happy out here. Oh man, I can smell the fumes from this catless exhaust. Yeah, this is no longer the ideal beginner sports car. This is an entirely different beast now, way faster in a straight line, but it's also quite a bit trickier to drive hard. Thankfully, these Brembo brakes are up to the task to balance out the additional power, and this Koni suspension actually feels surprisingly good. It's able to handle this mostly smooth road very well. It is addicting though, doing straight line pulls in second and third gear, but it loses some of that character that the stock Miata is known for. I hate to say it, there's big trade-offs when you go from a small, revvy, naturally aspirated engine to a turbocharged one. Is the extra top-end power worth it? I mean, if you're chasing lap times, maybe it is. But if you're just seeking driving engagement and fun, in the way that Mazda originally intended drivers to enjoy the Miata, then I think there are some major trade-offs here. You can get into a groove once you're used to it, but there's a learning curve now. The top end sound is so insane, and the power delivery and the smell, oh my god. So let me know what you guys think of this comparison. Definitely I prefer the feeling of a supercharged engine. Not to say this ND2 with a turbo isn't fun, it's just that it's not really a Miata anymore, whereas that supercharged BRZ still feels like a BRZ. It just has its performance elevated, whereas this one feels like a totally different beast. Either way, guys, a big shout out to Philip and to Kale. What is that sound? Okay, maybe it's the transmission. Let me know what you think about this comparison. Would you rather have a turbocharged ND2 Miata or a supercharged BRZ, or maybe vice versa? A turbo BRZ and a supercharged ND2 Miata. I'd love to review those. Thank you to Kevin from the Jabal and Cars YouTube channel for making this review possible, and I'll see you guys in the next one.